My name is Patricia, and I need to tell you what happened to me. It's not easy to relive these moments, but if sharing this story can alert even one woman to the dangers that hide in plain sight, then every difficult word will be worth it. We never truly imagine that something terrible can happen to us until it does, until the moment arrives and shatters our sense of safety forever. Everything began the day I met Adriano. He was a new client, different from the others I had encountered. Well-dressed, with that confident smile of someone who seemed to have everything under control, who moved through the world with an ease that made you want to trust him. Our first meeting was calm, ordinary even. He arrived on time, polite and respectful, speaking about his travels, about books he had read, about things that weren't common topics in these situations. He seemed harmless, like just another face in the crowd. But then came the first strange detail, the first crack in the facade. At the end of our encounter, while I was already preparing to leave, he made an unusual request. He looked directly at my earrings and said with that same calm voice, "Those earrings are beautiful. Could I keep one of them, just to remember you by?" In that moment, discomfort washed over me. Who asks for something like that? But he spoke in such a tranquil manner, so naturally, that I thought perhaps I was overreacting, reading too much into an innocent gesture. He seemed like a normal guy, educated and harmless, so I removed one of the earrings and handed it to him. After so much time in this routine, you learn to avoid conflict, to keep things smooth and uncomplicated. But something didn't sit right with me. That night, I arrived home and tried to forget about it, tried to push the interaction from my mind. But the way he held that earring, the way he smiled as he looked at it, I can't quite explain it, but it was strange, unsettling in a way that lingered. Adriano became a regular client. He always chose the same days, never arrived late, and at first, he continued to seem harmless, predictable even. But with time, things began to shift, to become increasingly strange. He asked too many questions, prying into corners of my life that clients shouldn't care about. Do you have other clients like me? What's your routine like outside of here? Where do you usually go to have fun? I tried to be evasive, giving vague answers that revealed nothing, but he was persistent, always circling back to these personal details. Then came another request, one that made my skin crawl. He wanted a lock of my hair. "Your hair is so beautiful. It suits you well. Could I keep a piece? Just a small lock? Nothing that would make a difference?" A shiver ran through my entire body. I made up some excuse and changed the subject, but he didn't give up easily. In the following visits, the request repeated itself, always delivered calmly, as if it were something completely normal, something any reasonable person might ask. That's when I started noticing other strange things, patterns that couldn't be explained away as coincidence. One day, heading home, I saw a car parked on my street. I didn't recognize it immediately, but then I realized it was the same car Adriano drove. Coincidence? Maybe, I tried to tell myself, but it wasn't the only time this happened. The car appeared again and again in places where I shouldn't have seen it. It seemed like he was everywhere I went, a shadow I couldn't shake. With time, my intuition began to scream that something was very wrong with Adriano. Have you ever felt that your instinct was trying to protect you from something you couldn't yet see, but your mind kept making excuses, kept telling you that you were imagining things? And here's something I've learned through all of this, something I need you to understand. We must listen to our intuition, no matter how much our rational mind tries to dismiss it. I couldn't sleep that night. The image of Adriano's car parked at the corner of my street wouldn't leave my mind, playing over and over like a terrible film. I had no concrete proof of anything, nothing that would hold up if questioned, but my intuition was screaming that he was watching me, studying me, and that realization sent chills down my spine. I decided I had to investigate, to find out who this man really was. I started with social media, searching for any digital footprint he might have left. His profile at first seemed normal enough. Photos of travels to exotic places, pictures of books, and occasional captions about how he appreciated the unique beauty in people. But in the comments section, there was something deeply unsettling. Several women tagged him and mentioned things like, "Thank you for keeping something so special from me." It made no sense. Special how? Special in what way? These cryptic messages felt like puzzle pieces I couldn't quite fit together, but I knew they meant something dark. The following week, I needed more answers, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed Adriano after one of our meetings. It was one of the riskiest things I've ever done in my life, but fear had transformed into a need to know the truth. He drove to a house on the outskirts of the city, almost at its edge, a property surrounded by dense trees that seemed to swallow all light and sound. It looked like a normal place from the outside, just another house, but something about it gave me chills that ran bone deep. I waited in my car, hidden in the shadows, until the lights inside went out. Then, with my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst and my hands trembling uncontrollably, I decided to walk around the property. The basement door was unlocked, almost as if inviting me in. I don't even know where I found the courage, but I entered that dark space, crossing a threshold I knew I could never uncross. The smell inside was suffocating, overwhelming my senses immediately. It was a mixture of mold and something sickeningly sweet that made me nauseous, that made my stomach turn. That's when I saw it, and my entire world shifted. There was an altar at the back of the basement, but it wasn't a religious altar, nothing sacred or holy about it. It was something personal, something deeply macabre and disturbing. Shelves upon shelves filled with small objects, earrings, necklaces, pieces of fabric, and even locks of hair, all carefully arranged and labeled. I recognized my earring there, positioned right in the center like a prized possession. But it wasn't just mine. There were photos of women I didn't know, dozens of them. Some looked happy in their pictures, captured in moments of joy, while others looked afraid, their eyes revealing terror. Then I recognized something that made my blood turn to ice in my veins. The necklace of a woman who had disappeared months before. I knew about her because the news had covered it extensively, her face plastered on every newspaper and news channel. She was never found, and now I knew why. My stomach twisted violently. I heard footsteps above me, heavy and deliberate. Adriano had returned, and panic seized every part of my being. I was in his basement, trapped in his house of horrors, with my phone in my hand, having filmed everything I'd seen. He couldn't find me there. I turned off the phone's flashlight and hid behind some boxes, making myself as small as possible, trying not to breathe, not to make a single sound. The footsteps grew closer, descending the stairs slowly, deliberately. He was whistling a calm tune, something cheerful and ordinary that made the situation even more terrifying. "I know someone's here," he said, his voice low and tranquil, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. "You can come out. I just want to talk." My hand trembled so violently that I almost dropped my phone, almost gave away my position. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and in a moment that was equal parts courage and pure desperation, I stood up and ran toward the stairs. He tried to grab me, his fingers brushing my arm, but I pushed him with every ounce of strength I possessed, fueled by adrenaline and raw survival instinct. I climbed those steps, stumbling, tripping over my own feet, but somehow I reached the front door. He was coming after me, his footsteps pounding behind me, but he tripped over one of the boxes in the basement, and that momentary stumble was what saved my life. I ran like I had never run before, every muscle screaming, and got into my car. Without thinking, without pausing to process what had just happened, I drove straight to the police station. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I could no longer remain silent, that my silence could cost not just my life, but the lives of other women. Even after handing over the video and describing the objects I had seen in that basement to the police, The feeling of relief I expected never came. Adriano was arrested that very night, taken into custody as officers descended on his property. They found more than I had imagined, more than my worst nightmares could have conjured. There were detailed records of other women, personal objects belonging to dozens of victims, and even diaries with disturbing, meticulous details about each one of them. It was as if he collected pieces of each woman's life, keeping them as bizarre trophies of his obsession, tangible proof of his control over them. But for me, the story was far from over. The nightmare had only changed shape. In the days that followed, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. Sleep became nearly impossible. Each noise out of place made me leap from bed in terror. I knew Adriano was behind bars, locked away where he couldn't physically reach me, but that knowledge didn't make me feel safe. He wasn't just any monster. He knew how to infiltrate your life without you noticing, how to slip past your defenses with a smile and polite conversation. I kept asking myself how many women, just like me, had ignored that initial discomfort, that cold feeling running down their spine until it was too late, until they became another object on his shelves. At the trial, he acted as if none of it was serious, as if this were all some misunderstanding. Sitting there in his impeccable suit, he still wore that same calm smile, presenting himself as the most innocent person in the world. He even looked at me once, directly in my eyes across that courtroom, and smiled. It was the last time I saw that smile in person, but the image of it still haunts me, appears in my dreams and in quiet moments when I least expect it. Justice was served, they say, those words that are supposed to bring closure. But nobody talks about the sleepless nights that stretch into weeks, the months spent trying to rebuild a life that was shattered, and the fear that I still feel every single time I hear footsteps behind me on the street. That immediate spike of fear, that instinct to turn around and assess the danger. Life has never been the same since that night, and I don't think it ever will be. The world looks different now, darker somehow, filled with shadows that weren't there before. I decided to share my story because I know with absolute certainty that I'm not the only one, that there are countless women out there who ignore small signs just like I did, who dismiss their intuition because it seems easier, safer somehow. Sometimes we think we're exaggerating, that it's just our imagination running wild, that we're being paranoid or irrational. But let me tell you something that might save your life. Listen to your intuition, always. If something feels wrong, if that little voice inside you is whispering warnings, it probably is wrong. Our instincts exist for a reason, honed over thousands of years of evolution to protect us from danger we can't always consciously identify. Today I live with much more caution, with an awareness that weighs on me daily. I changed houses, moved to a different neighborhood where nobody knows my story. I completely altered my routine, making sure never to follow the same patterns, never to become predictable. I always let someone know where I am, who I'm with, when I expect to return. It seems like paranoia, I know it does. People probably think I'm overreacting, that I'm letting fear control my life. But after everything I lived through, after staring into the face of true evil, I learned that it's better to err on the side of excessive caution than to let something pass that could cost you your life, your freedom, your very existence. So if you're listening to this right now, please guard my words carefully in your heart. Trust your instinct above all else, even when it seems irrational. Take care of yourself, protect yourself, and never let yourself be convinced by that smile that seems harmless, by that charming demeanor that makes you want to trust. ¿Has considerado cómo un solo momento de duda podría cambiar tu vida para siempre? Cómo escuchar esa voz interior podría ser la diferencia entre estar aquí ahora y convertirte en otro rostro en las noticias. I almost paid the highest price for ignoring the signs, for dismissing my own intuition. Don't make the same mistake I did. Share in the comments a reflection beginning with, "I commit to," about how you'll honor your intuition from this moment forward. Because when we speak our commitments aloud, when we declare them to the world, they become real. They become promises we're more likely to keep. Your words might inspire another woman to trust herself, to listen to that warning voice, and that could save a life. My story is a warning, a cautionary tale written in fear and survival. And if it can prevent even one woman from going through what I endured, if it can save even one life, then perhaps all of this suffering will have been worth it, will have had meaning beyond the nightmares that still wake me in the darkness. You know that strange feeling that sometimes hits you out of nowhere, that sensation in your gut that something isn't right. That little voice inside you saying better not, whispering warnings you can't quite explain. Well, I should have listened to mine, but like so many of us, I assume nothing bad would actually happen to me. We always think we're the exception, that danger is something that happens to other people in other places. It was just another Friday, ordinary in every way, and I was finishing getting ready to go out when my phone rang. On the other line was a man with a deep voice, polite almost to excess, overly formal in a way that should have raised red flags. He introduced himself as someone who appreciated exclusivity, someone who wanted to arrange a nighttime ride with me. Up to that point, everything seemed normal enough, just another client making arrangements. But then he asked us to meet in a remote location, somewhere far from the city center, and that struck me as strange. Of course it did, but he offered a substantial amount of money, one of those sums that makes you ignore any warning signs, that makes you rationalize away your own fear. I arrived at the empty parking lot he'd mentioned, and just looking at the place made my stomach turn with unease. It was dark, lit only by those flickering streetlights that blink on and off intermittently, creating pools of shadow that seemed to move. He was there, leaning against a black luxury car, dressed elegantly, looking like a completely normal guy, someone you'd see in any upscale restaurant or business meeting. We got into the car, and he started making conversation, but his questions were invasive, probing. He asked personal things like whether I had family, whether anyone knew where I was at that moment. I found that very strange, deeply unsettling, so I deflected, pretended I was distracted by something on my phone. During the drive, he would suddenly turn up the radio whenever the silence stretched too long, as if he wanted to drown out some sound, to cover something he didn't want me to hear. That's when I heard it for the first time, a muffled sound coming from the trunk. It was low, barely audible over the music, but it sounded like a moan, like something alive and suffering. I asked jokingly, trying to keep my voice light, "Do you have someone locked back there?" He gave a dry laugh, one of those sounds that freezes your blood and makes your heart skip beats, and responded, "Don't worry, it's just my favorite doll." My mind stopped processing for a moment. What kind of answer was that? What kind of person says something like that? I looked at him, searching his face, trying to understand if he was joking or if he was serious, if this was some twisted sense of humor or something far darker. He smiled at me, but his eyes remained cold, empty of any warmth or genuine humor. I didn't say anything else, but the discomfort grew with every kilometer we traveled, spreading through my chest like ice water. He began deviating from the route he had mentioned earlier, turning onto less busy streets, roads that grew progressively darker and more isolated. I said I thought it would be better if we went back, that I'd changed my mind, but he insisted that he knew a special place and wanted to take me there. While he drove, the sound from the trunk returned, and this time it seemed louder, more insistent, impossible to ignore or explain away. My heart raced, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I started thinking about what could be in there, and my head filled with horrible thoughts, images I couldn't control. But I couldn't show anything, couldn't let him know that I suspected, that I was terrified. I said I needed to stop somewhere, invented an excuse that I was feeling sick, needed air. He hesitated, studying my face for a long moment, but eventually pulled over at a gas station. The place was empty, deserted, just the two of us under those harsh fluorescent lights. I ran to the bathroom, trying to breathe deeply and think of a plan, any plan that might save me from whatever was about to happen. When I returned, he was distracted, looking at his phone, his attention elsewhere for the first time. It was my chance, perhaps my only one. With the excuse of grabbing something from my purse in the back seat, I moved toward the trunk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. I opened it slowly, quietly, with my heart beating so fast I thought it might explode, thought I might pass out right there. Inside was a life-sized doll, but it was different from any doll I'd ever seen, something deeply wrong about it. Her eyes were sewn shut with black thread, crude stitches that looked painful, even on synthetic features. The clothes were stained with something that looked like dried blood, dark patches that couldn't be anything else. And beside her lay a lock of hair and a necklace that seemed far too familiar, far too real to just be props. ¿Qué pasaría si en este momento te dijera que ese collar pertenecía a alguien que ya no está viva, que ese cabello fue cortado de alguien que nunca regresó a casa? I closed the trunk quickly, my entire body shaking, and returned to the front seat, trying to act as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't just tilted completely off its axis. Déjame en los comentarios tu reflexión comenzando con yo agradezco por esa intuición que te ha protegido en momentos difíciles. When you acknowledge the times your intuition has saved you, you strengthen that connection, you learn to trust it more completely. Your gratitude might remind someone else to listen to their own inner voice, and that awareness could be the difference between life and death. He looked at me with a strange smile, one that seemed to say he knew exactly what I'd seen, that this was all part of some sick game he was playing. After that, everything got worse, spiraled into nightmare territory. He started talking about how some things are too valuable to be shared, about how he had preserved some of them, kept them safe in his own twisted way. My heart was in my throat, choking me. He stopped the car on a deserted road in the middle of a forest, surrounded by darkness and silence that felt oppressive, suffocating. He said he wanted to show me something special, something he thought I'd appreciate. When he got out of the car, I knew with absolute clarity that this was my only chance, my last opportunity to save myself. I grabbed his phone that he'd left on the console and called the police, whispering frantically, begging them to trace the call. While searching the car for anything I could use as a weapon, I found a tire iron under the back seat. My plan was simple, desperate, run the moment I had any opening. As soon as he started walking away from the car, moving toward the trunk again, I bolted. I ran as fast as I could, faster than I'd ever run in my life, my lungs burning with every breath. He shouted behind me, his voice filled with rage now, all pretense of calm gone, but I didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. The trees all looked the same in the darkness, and I could only think about reaching somewhere safe, anywhere with lights and people. Suddenly, I saw the lights of a car on the road ahead and started waving desperately, my arms flailing above my head. But it was him. He'd circled around somehow, cut off my escape. I thought it was over, that this was how my story would end. But by some miracle, the police arrived quickly, their sirens cutting through the night like salvation. They ordered him to stop the car and open the trunk. When the police opened that trunk, I watched their eyes widen with horror, saw them exchange glances that confirmed my worst fears. They removed the doll carefully, as if it were evidence in a crime scene, which it was. They began analyzing the other items, And that's when they discovered the truth. The hair and necklace belonged to missing women, to victims who had disappeared without a trace. He was arrested right there while I gave my statement, still trembling so badly I could barely speak, my voice breaking with every word. The police said he was a suspect in several cases of disappearances in the region, cases that had gone cold, lives that had simply vanished without explanation. To this day, I cannot forget the sewn eyes of that doll, those crude black stitches that haunt my dreams. I cannot erase the cold smile of that man, the way his face remained calm even as the police handcuffed him, as if this were all just a minor inconvenience. This experience fundamentally changed my life, altered the way I move through the world, the way I assess every situation and every person I encounter. Now I always trust my instincts, no matter how irrational they might seem to others, no matter how much my logical mind tries to dismiss them. I'm here telling you this because I want you to do the same, because I need you to understand that your intuition is not your enemy. Never ignore that feeling that something is wrong, that sensation in your gut that screams danger, even when everything looks fine on the surface. Trust yourself, always. It's better to lose an opportunity to seem paranoid or overcautious than to risk your own life. Your safety is worth more than any amount of money, any social approval, any fear of seeming foolish. Have you ever felt that something was wrong but ignored it because you thought it was just in your head, just your imagination running wild? Well, that's exactly what happened to me that night, and it nearly cost me everything. I was 28 years old and had been working as a luxury escort for some time. It wasn't something I had planned for my life, not the dream I'd had as a child, but it was what paid the bills and helped me finish college, allowed me to build toward a different future. I'd always been careful with my clients, always checked references thoroughly, evaluated profiles, studied patterns. I thought I knew how to identify dangers, thought I had developed an instinct for recognizing the warning signs. Until I encountered him. He seemed like the perfect client in every way, polite, well-dressed, with a calm voice and an unhurried manner. The type of man who makes you feel safe just by being in his presence. We arranged to meet at a luxury hotel in the city center, one of those places with marble lobbies and attentive staff. The payment would be substantial, and the conversation over the phone had been full of respect, full of consideration. Nothing about him seemed wrong. Not a single red flag appeared until I arrived there. The place was impeccable, something straight out of a movie, all elegant furnishings and soft lighting. I went up to the suite and was greeted with a charming smile, the kind that puts you at ease immediately. Everything seemed normal, perfectly ordinary, exactly what I'd expected. But as the evening progressed, he began asking questions that left me uncomfortable, that made something inside me tighten with anxiety. "Do you live alone? Does anyone know you're here right now?" I tried to change the subject, deflecting with practiced ease, but the uneasiness began growing inside me like a living thing. When I said it was time for me to leave, that I had other commitments, he insisted that I have one last glass of wine with him, just one more drink before I went. I was polite but firm, maintaining my boundaries. "Better not. I have an early commitment tomorrow." That's when his smile disappeared completely, vanished like it had never existed. Before I could react, before my mind could even process what was happening, I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. When I turned, I saw another man standing behind me, appearing from nowhere. Everything became confused after that, a chaotic mixture of screams, desperation, and then darkness swallowing me whole. When I woke up, everything was wrong, fundamentally and terribly wrong. I was in a cold, damp place with chains on my wrists and ankles, the metal cutting into my skin. My head was throbbing with pain, and fear took complete control of every thought, every breath. I wasn't alone. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, was sobbing quietly in a corner, her body shaking with silent tears. "Where are we?" I asked, trying desperately not to panic, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me with eyes full of absolute terror, eyes that had seen things no one should ever see. They brought us here. We're trapped." That's when I realized I had entered the nightmare of my life, a horror I couldn't wake up from no matter how hard I tried. I didn't know how much time had passed, but it felt like an eternity, like we'd been there for years, though it might have only been days. The place was dark, perpetually shadowed, with the smell of mold and fear embedded in the walls, soaked into every surface. There were no windows, no natural light to mark the passage of time, only a metal door that seemed invincible, impenetrable. The young woman, whose name was Carol, had been there for weeks at least, or so she thought. In this hell, time loses all meaning, all structure. Days blend into nights, into days again, until you can't remember what sunlight looks like. Carol told me about our captors, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid they might hear. They operated a human trafficking network, she explained, and exploited women like us, women they deemed disposable. "They say no one will find us, that we're worthless, that we're garbage," she whispered, her voice breaking. My mind was in shock, struggling to process this reality. But one thing I knew with absolute certainty: I wasn't going to give up, wasn't going to let them break me. The men who kept us there were cruel in ways I'd never imagined possible, using words as weapons to break our spirits before they ever touched us. "Nobody cares about you," they would say, their voices cold and matter-of-fact. "Obey, and you might live another day." Sometimes it was worse than words. When one of us tried to resist, tried to fight back or refuse their commands, the punishment came quick and brutal, a lesson designed to crush any remaining hope. Even so, I observed everything carefully, each movement they made, each routine they followed, looking for patterns, for weaknesses. Some flaw had to appear eventually. No system is perfect. Carol was on the edge of despair, barely holding on to sanity, but I couldn't let that happen, couldn't let them win. "We're getting out of here, Carol. I don't know how yet, but we will," I promised her. She looked at me as if I were crazy, as if hope itself was a delusion. "¿Recuerdas la última vez que te negaste a rendirte, cuando algo dentro de ti se negó a aceptar la derrota, incluso cuando todo parecía perdido? Maybe I was crazy. Maybe hope was irrational in that place. But the will to survive was stronger than fear, stronger than logic, stronger than anything they could do to us." Te invito a escribir en los comentarios completando la frase "Yo agradezco por" esa fuerza interior que te ha sostenido en los momentos más oscuros. When you acknowledge your own resilience, you honor not just yourself, but every person who has ever refused to give up. Your words of gratitude become a beacon for others who are struggling, who need to know that survival is possible, that strength can be found even in darkness. One night, something different happened, something that would change everything. One of the kidnappers left the key to the main door in the pocket of his jacket, which he'd hung carelessly near where we were chained. It was a small mistake, barely noticeable, but in that place it was everything I needed, the opportunity I'd been waiting for. "Carol, this is our chance," I whispered urgently. We formed a quick plan: wait until he fell asleep, then retrieve the key. My hands trembled violently when I finally managed to reach it, stretching my chained arm as far as it would go. It was now or never, this moment or possibly no moment ever again. We managed to open the door, but it wasn't easy, wasn't the simple escape I'd imagined. The corridors were a labyrinth, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense, and my heart beat so loudly I thought they could hear it, thought it would give us away. We were almost at the exit, so close to freedom I could almost taste it when they noticed. Shouts erupted behind us, footsteps pounding, getting closer. "Run, Carol!" I screamed, pushing her forward, but in that last second she was grabbed, pulled back by rough hands. Everything inside me said to keep running, to save my own life, to escape while I still could. But I couldn't do it, couldn't leave her there. I turned back, fueled by adrenaline I didn't know I possessed, and fought the kidnapper with everything I had: nails, teeth, even a rock I found on the ground. It was brutal, violent, desperate, but it worked. Carol and I managed to escape into the forest surrounding the compound, and we didn't look back, didn't stop running until our legs couldn't carry us anymore, until we collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. By luck or divine intervention, we found a road, and a truck driver stopped to help us. He called the police immediately, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like we were truly safe, like this nightmare might actually end. But freedom had a bitter taste, came with a weight I hadn't anticipated. What we went through left deep scars, wounds that will never fully heal. I looked at Carol as the ambulance took us to the hospital, and we both knew the same truth without speaking it. We had survived, but we would never be the same people we were before. Today, I'm here telling this story because I believe I need to do this. Need to speak these words even though they're difficult, even though reliving these moments brings back the terror. It's not easy to talk about what happened, to expose this vulnerability to the world. This opens a wound I've tried to keep closed. Shares a pain I haven't wanted to revisit with anyone. The fear, the sensation that you've been forgotten by the world, that you're worthless. It's something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The police managed to dismantle part of the network that kidnapped us, arrested several of the men involved, shut down their operation in that location. But I know there are still many women who didn't have the same luck we did, who are still trapped in places like that, still suffering in silence. That's why I need you to listen to me, really hear what I'm saying. Trust your instincts always, without exception. If something seems wrong, it's because it probably is wrong. Take care of yourself, protect yourself, value your own safety above all else. And if you can, speak up, share your story as I'm doing now. Together, we can create a safer world, can build networks of protection and awareness. This is my way of surviving what happened, of transforming fear into strength, of taking back the power they tried to steal from me. I hope that somehow, in some way, this inspires you too, gives you courage to trust yourself. Stay alert, and please, take care of yourself and those you love. You know when you feel that something is wrong, but can't explain why. Can't put your finger on what exactly is triggering that alarm inside you. Well, that's how it was that night. I was there on the same corner as always, working my usual spot, following a routine that I'll admit is not the best life has to offer, but is part of my reality, part of how I survive. I watched the cars passing, some people looking, others pretending they didn't see me, averting their eyes as they drove by. It was just another normal night, unremarkable in every way, until it wasn't. Everything began when I felt a touch on my shoulder, light but distinct. At first I thought it was someone trying to get my attention, maybe a potential client or someone I knew. But when I turned around, there was nobody there, nothing but empty air and shadows. I looked around in all directions, scanning the street carefully, but there wasn't a living soul near me, not within 50 feet. I shrugged, laughing at myself, thinking I was being ridiculous. My imagination, I thought, dismissing it. But then it happened again and again, only this time the touch came accompanied by a shiver that ran up my spine, a physical sensation that was impossible to ignore. The feeling was ice cold, like when you touch something that's been in a freezer, that immediate shock of extreme cold. I began to feel strange, deeply unsettled, as if someone was watching me intently, studying me. But there was nobody there. Nobody visible anyway. The corner seemed emptier than ever before, more isolated, and the silence— oh, that silence was what scared me most. It wasn't the normal quiet of a slow night. It was something heavier, more oppressive, like the world had stopped breathing. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that it was just my head playing tricks on me, my mind creating problems where none existed. But the discomfort only increased with each passing minute, growing like a weight on my chest. It felt like the air around me was getting heavier, thicker, harder to breathe. That's when it started. First a low sound, barely audible, like someone was whispering very close to my ear. I looked behind me again, thinking it must be some joker trying to scare me, someone playing a stupid prank. But there was nobody there, nobody at all. The whisper seemed to come from all sides at once, from everywhere and nowhere, words I couldn't understand, sounds that weren't quite language. The worst part was when I felt the touch again. Only this time it was different, more insistent, more real, more aggressive. This time it wasn't just a touch. It was like nails scratching my shoulder, digging into my skin with purpose. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, pounding so hard I thought I might faint. When I looked down at my shoulder, I couldn't believe what I saw. There were red marks on my skin, clear scratches, as if someone had really grabbed me there, as if physical hands had pressed into my flesh. But again, there was nobody around me, no one I could see anyway. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and decided it was time to go home, to get away from that corner and whatever was happening there. As I walked, I felt watched, intensely observed, as if something was following me through the empty streets, matching my pace step for step. But I didn't have the courage to look back, couldn't bring myself to turn around and face whatever might be there. I arrived at my apartment faster than ever, practically running the last block, and closed the door behind me, leaning against it heavily, trying to understand what was happening to me. Was I going crazy, losing my grip on reality? Or was there truly something there with me, something I couldn't see or understand? When I finally managed to breathe more calmly, when my heart stopped racing quite so violently, I went straight to the bathroom. I wanted to wash my face and try to forget everything that had happened, to wash away the fear and confusion. I turned on the light, but it started flickering, blinking on and off as if it were playing with me, mocking my terror. Oh no, not now, I thought, already irritated, already feeling my nerves fraying. As I looked at myself in the mirror, trying to see if the scratches were still visible, I got that chill again, that deep cold that runs through your entire body. That's when I saw it, right there behind me in the reflection, a shadow. It wasn't my shadow, wasn't a trick of the light. It was tall, seemed undefined somehow, as if it were covered by a dark fog that shifted and moved. I froze completely, couldn't move a single muscle, couldn't summon the courage to turn around and look directly at what was behind me. Nothing. There was absolutely nobody there in the physical space, just empty air. But my heart was racing again, pounding in my ears, and still I continued staring at the mirror, unable to look away. Something inside me said that if I looked away, if I broke eye contact with that reflection, it would get worse. Something terrible would happen. That's when it began. First, the towel that was hanging on the rack fell to the floor without anyone touching it. Just dropped, as if invisible hands had pulled it down. Then the soap slipped from the edge of the sink, clattering loudly. Each small sound seemed like a thunderclap in that absurd silence, echoing off the bathroom tiles. And then, once more I felt it, the touch on my shoulder. But this time it was so strong, so forceful, that it felt like someone was really behind me, physically present, pulling me backward. I ran out of there screaming, didn't want to know what it was, didn't want to see anything more. I locked myself in my bedroom, sat on the floor with my back against the door, and stayed there, trembling, shaking uncontrollably, trying to think about what to do. This wasn't normal, couldn't be normal. Something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. The next day, I couldn't pretend nothing had happened, couldn't go on with normal life as if the world hadn't shifted beneath my feet. I called my friend Mariana and told her everything, every detail, no matter how crazy it sounded. "You have to investigate this," she said firmly. At first I laughed, the suggestion seeming absurd. Investigate what, exactly? But the truth is, that idea kept hammering in my head, wouldn't leave me alone. I spent the afternoon researching the place where I usually worked, digging through old news articles and local history, and what I found left me covered in goosebumps, chilled to my core. I discovered that years ago a man had disappeared near there. He was known for frequenting that area, was a regular presence on those streets, and one day he simply vanished without a trace. Nobody knew what had happened to him, and the case had gone cold quickly. ¿Te has preguntado por qué algunos lugares guardan ecos del pasado? ¿Por qué ciertos traumas se niegan a desvanecerse incluso después de que el tiempo intenta borrarlos? Some residents of the area said that since then, strange things happened on that corner. People reported hearing footsteps when no one was there, whispers in the darkness, and feeling ice-cold touches, just like the ones I had experienced. Escribe en los comentarios una intención que empiece con "Yo decido" sobre cómo honrarás las voces que otros no pueden escuchar. When you declare your intention to listen, to pay attention to what others dismiss, you become a bridge between worlds, a voice for the voiceless. Your commitment might inspire someone else to trust their experiences, to not dismiss what they can't easily explain, and that courage to acknowledge the unseen can lead to healing and truth. The story left me deeply unsettled, anxious in a way I'd never felt before. Could that be it? Could that man still be trapped somehow, bound to that location by unfinished business or injustice? I didn't believe much in these things before, had always been skeptical of ghost stories and supernatural explanations. But after what I'd experienced, what I'd felt and seen, it was hard to ignore the possibility. I decided I needed to know more, that perhaps understanding what was happening would be the key to ending it, to bringing peace to whatever was reaching out to me from beyond. That night I stayed awake, reading everything I could find about the case, scrolling through old news archives and forum posts. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just an old story that people had forgotten. Something was still very wrong about that place, and now it seemed connected to me, had chosen me for some reason I didn't understand. Telling this story, sharing what happened, I decided I couldn't continue like this, couldn't keep running from it. I needed to face this head-on, even though fear made me want to flee, to move to another city and never look back. The following night, I returned to that corner. I confess my hand was trembling as I held my purse, and my steps were so heavy it felt like the ground might give way beneath me. I stood there for a while, looking around as if expecting something to happen, waiting for some sign. Nothing. Everything was too normal. And that made me even more tense, more aware. It was like the silence before a storm, that oppressive calm that warns of violence to come. That's when I felt it again, the ice-cold touch, but this time on my arm, more insistent. I took a deep breath, trying not to scream, trying to maintain some composure. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts. I wasn't sure if I expected an answer or just wanted to push away the fear by breaking the silence. Suddenly I heard it, and it wasn't just a whisper this time. It was a clear, desperate voice, cutting through the night air. "Help me!" It was a masculine voice, hoarse, almost muffled, as if coming from underwater or from very far away. My eyes filled with tears. I don't know if it was from fear or from feeling that intense pain in his voice, that desperate plea that couldn't be ignored. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" I asked, but there was no response, only the same icy silence surrounding me. I looked around frantically, searching for something, anything, that would explain this, that would make sense of what was happening. But it was as if the entire world had stopped for those few seconds, frozen in time. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty this wasn't just my imagination playing tricks, wasn't stress or exhaustion. There was something there, something real, and he needed my help. The next day I went looking for help, recognizing I couldn't do this alone. I remembered a woman on my street who had a reputation for understanding these things, for seeing what others couldn't. I didn't know her well, had only seen her in passing, but honestly, I was willing to try anything at this point, desperate for answers. I knocked on her door in the late afternoon, and as soon as I told my story, she looked at me with a serious expression that told me she believed every word. "You're dealing with a trapped spirit, probably because of something very bad that happened to him," she said while handling some candles and crystals she had arranged on her table. I didn't know if I believed in any of this or if I thought it was all madness, but somehow it all made sense, fit together like puzzle pieces. "He wants justice, wants you to listen to him," the woman continued. She asked me to describe what I had felt and heard, and after several minutes of conversation, she did something that left me chilled to the bone. She pulled out an old newspaper from under the table and pointed to a news article. It was about the man who had disappeared on that corner, the case I'd been researching. "It's him," she said with certainty. "He's trying to show you something." I left there with a knot in my throat and a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. Knowing this was real, that I wasn't imagining things, only made everything more frightening, more overwhelming. But at the same time, I began to feel a strange desire to help, a pull I couldn't explain. This wasn't just about me anymore, wasn't about my fear or my safety. It was about giving peace to someone who was clearly trapped in terrible suffering, someone who had no other way to reach out to the living world. Going back to that corner that night was the hardest thing I've ever done. Each step seemed heavier than the one before, and the air around me felt colder, denser, as if the atmosphere itself was changing. I was carrying with me some things the woman had given me, a white candle, a piece of paper with something written on it that I didn't understand, and a small bell. "This will help," she'd said. But I wasn't so confident, wasn't sure anything could truly help with what I was facing. Arriving there, I took a deep breath and positioned myself in the same place where everything had begun, where I'd first felt that touch. I lit the candle with trembling hands and closed my eyes, trying to center myself. I didn't really know what to do, had no script or ritual to follow, but I decided I would speak even if it seemed like madness. "I know you're here. I know you need help. Tell me what you want me to do." For a moment nothing happened, and I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if this was all pointless. But then the wind began to blow, strong and sudden, and I heard it again. "Help me." Only this time the voice was clearer, closer, right beside my ear. The bell in my hand started to swing by itself, ringing softly, and I felt the same touch on my shoulder, now stronger, as if someone wanted to pull me somewhere, to show me something. "You need to show me what happened to you," I said, barely holding back tears, my voice breaking with emotion. The wind grew stronger, whipping around me in a circle, and then I saw something I can't fully explain. It was like a flash, like watching a movie projected directly into my mind. Images of a man being attacked on that very corner, in that exact spot where I stood. He was trying to scream, trying to call for help, but nobody appeared to save him. Nobody heard his desperate cries. His face was the same as in the newspaper photo. Unmistakable. My body went cold, ice spreading through my veins as I felt all the pain and despair he must have experienced in those final moments. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. And that's when I realized what I needed to do, what he'd been trying to show me all along. The next day, I went straight to the police station with everything I knew. I told them about the story I'd found in the newspaper, about the strange things that had happened, and even about the woman who had helped me understand. Of course, I left out the supernatural details. Who would believe that? But I talked about the disappearance of the man and suggested that perhaps it would be worth investigating again, reopening the cold case. The police officers at first looked at me as if I were crazy, as if I'd wasted their time with nonsense. But one of them, an older detective with kind eyes, seemed to understand the gravity of what I was saying, seemed to sense there was truth beneath my strange story. He promised to look at the old files, to review the evidence that had been collected years ago, and to my surprise, to my absolute shock, a few weeks later, I received a phone call that changed everything. They had found proof that the man had been murdered there, exactly as I had seen in those terrible visions, in those flashes of violence and terror. And thanks to that renewed investigation, they managed to connect the crime to someone who was already imprisoned for something else. Another crime that finally led them back to this one. Justice was finally served, finally given to a man who had been forgotten, whose death had gone unpunished for so long. After that, I never felt that touch again, never heard those desperate whispers calling out to me in the darkness. The corner that used to give me chills, that used to fill me with dread, now seemed like just another ordinary place, unremarkable and safe. But deep down I knew I would never forget that experience, would never forget the feeling of being chosen, of being reached across the barrier between life and death. I don't know why he chose me specifically, why I was the one who could hear him when so many others had walked past that corner without feeling anything. But I feel that I did something important, something that truly mattered in ways I'm still trying to understand. Today I'm telling this story here because I know that deep down these things are real, whether you believe in them or not. They exist in the spaces between what we can see and what we can feel. And sometimes all they need, all these lost souls are searching for, is for someone to truly listen, to pay attention, to care enough to seek justice on their behalf. Hi everyone, my name is Julia, and what I'm going to tell you today isn't easy to share, isn't the kind of story that comes naturally or without cost. But I feel it's necessary, feel it's my responsibility to speak these words. I work as a luxury escort, and despite always being careful, despite all my precautions and years of experience, I lived through something that fundamentally changed my life, changed how I see the world and the people in it. This story is to warn you, especially women, about how danger can be much closer than we imagine, how it can wear the most convincing disguises. Everything began with a message, seemingly innocent, the kind I receive regularly. It was from a client named Eduardo, and his manner was so polite, so careful and considerate that it caught me off guard immediately. He told me he had found me through a website where I advertised my services, and he wanted to schedule a meeting. Up to that point, everything seemed normal, just standard procedure. But he did something that caught my attention, something unusual. He insisted that our meeting should be at a public restaurant, so I would feel safer, more comfortable. I was somewhat suspicious, because normally clients don't worry about these things, don't think about my comfort or safety. But I ended up thinking it was a sign of respect, of genuine consideration. I accepted the dinner invitation. Eduardo seemed very different from other clients I'd encountered over the years. He spoke well, had a discreet elegance about him, and seemed to genuinely understand how important it was to make me feel at ease, to establish trust. But looking back now, with the clarity that only hindsight provides, I realize he knew exactly what he was doing, every word calculated, every gesture designed to lower my defenses. The day arrived, and there I was at a super-fancy restaurant, dressed elegantly, with that nervous flutter in your stomach that you feel when meeting someone new, when stepping into unknown territory. He was waiting for me at a corner table with a calm smile that seemed warm and genuine. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, without any pressure or uncomfortable moments. He seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, asking questions that felt sincere rather than invasive. At the end of the night, he suggested a second meeting, but this time at a luxury hotel, somewhere more private and intimate. Eduardo offered substantial payment, enough to make me ignore that discomfort that was emerging deep down inside, that small voice whispering warnings I didn't want to hear. I had reservations, had that instinct telling me something wasn't quite right. But he was so convincing, so attentive and respectful, that I ended up saying yes, agreeing despite my doubts. I left that dinner with a strange sensation I couldn't quite name. Eduardo was too perfect, too carefully constructed, but at the same time he seemed harmless, non-threatening. That's what made me lower my guard, made me dismiss my intuition. ¿Cuántas veces has ignorado esa voz interior que te advierte porque alguien parece demasiado bueno para ser verdad? ¿Cuántas veces has sacrificado tu seguridad por no parecer paranoica o difícil? And that's what I want to warn you about. What I need you to understand. Never ignore the signs, no matter how small or irrational they seem. Your instinct exists to protect you, and when it speaks, you must listen. Comparte en los comentarios tu experiencia comenzando con "Yo siento que", sobre un momento en que tu intuición te protegió o deseaste haberla escuchado. When you share these moments, you create a community of awareness. You help other women recognize the patterns of danger before it's too late. Your story, your honesty about times you listened or didn't listen to your inner voice might be the warning someone else needs to hear right now. Might save a life by helping them trust themselves. In the following days, I began noticing strange things about him, details that didn't add up. First, he had no social media presence at all. No Instagram, no LinkedIn, nothing. I searched for his phone number online, but nothing reliable appeared. No digital footprint that would confirm his identity. Even so, he continued sending polite messages, talking enthusiastically about our upcoming meeting at the hotel. When I asked about the reservation, he said he'd made it under a friend's name because he wanted discretion, valued his privacy. At the time, that sounded like a reasonable excuse, but now I recognize it as a red flag I should have heeded. Still, I ignored it, told myself I was being paranoid, overthinking things. I decided to take precautions regardless of my doubts. I told my friend Anna about the meeting and arranged to send her my location in real time to keep her updated throughout the evening. We also established a code. If I sent help, she would know something was wrong and needed to act immediately, to call the police without hesitation. This gave me some sense of security, made me feel protected, but I still didn't know what was coming, didn't understand the danger I was walking into. I arrived at the hotel and immediately noticed something was wrong. Felt that familiar warning tingle. The receptionist said there was no reservation under the name he had given me, no record of any booking. I called him, my hands starting to shake, and he appeared in the reception area a few minutes later with a ready excuse, smooth and practiced. "Oh, there must have been an error in the system. Let's go up, everything's already sorted out now." In the elevator he seemed different somehow, more serious, less friendly, his mask beginning to slip. We entered the room, and the first thing I noticed was the smell of strong masculine cologne, as if someone had just left moments before, as if the room had been occupied recently. My body went cold, every nerve screaming danger. But I maintained my composure, kept my face neutral while he talked, while he moved around the room. I noticed a shadow in the mirror, reflecting something that shouldn't be there, something or someone I couldn't quite see directly. I pretended I hadn't seen anything, acted casual and relaxed, but internally I began formulating a plan, thinking through every possible exit. My heart was racing, pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I knew that if I showed fear, if I revealed that I suspected something, it could make things worse, could trigger whatever he was planning. He began acting stranger, more erratic, avoiding eye contact and constantly checking his phone, as if waiting for something, coordinating with someone. That's when the bathroom door opened, and another man stepped out from there, emerging from where he'd been hiding the entire time. The two of them looked at each other and laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold, a shared joke at my expense. My instinct was to stand up immediately and leave, to run for the door without explanation. But Eduardo locked it before I could make any move, before I could even take a step. His face had changed completely now, all pretense of kindness gone. "Julia, it's better if you don't make a scene. We just want to take a few little things, and then you can leave here without any problems," he said, his voice now hard and threatening. He pointed to my purse, to my phone, and began demanding passwords for accounts, for banking apps, demanding transfers of money while the other man stood blocking my exit. While he talked, while he made his threats, I maintained my composure somehow, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. I said I would cooperate, would give them whatever they wanted, but I needed my phone to make the transfers, to access my accounts. When I picked up the phone, my hands shaking but steady enough, I discreetly sent the code to Anna. Help. Just that one word that meant everything, that could save my life. The minutes that followed were filled with absolute desperation, with terror barely contained beneath a calm surface. They went through my purse, laughing while talking about what they would do if I didn't cooperate, making threats that turned my stomach. I could only think about how to buy time, how to keep them talking until help could arrive, praying that Anna had seen my message and acted quickly. Suddenly, I heard pounding on the door, aggressive and authoritative. My heart stopped for a moment, suspended between hope and fear. It was the police, and a voice from outside shouted, "Open now, or we're breaking it down!" Eduardo tried to maintain his calm, tried to think of a way out. But the other man panicked completely and ran to the bathroom, attempting to hide or escape. Before he could lock himself in, before Eduardo could formulate any plan, the police burst through the door. Everything happened so fast it felt surreal, like watching a movie. I was pulled out of there immediately, removed from danger, while they were handcuffed and taken away by officers who had arrived just in time. Outside, Anna was waiting for me, tears streaming down her face, but relief evident in her eyes. I threw myself into her arms and started crying too, finally allowing myself to feel everything I'd been holding back, all the terror and fear I'd suppressed to survive. What could have been the worst day of my life, what could have ended in tragedy, instead ended with a relief I cannot adequately describe, a gratitude for being alive that overwhelmed every other emotion. After that night, my entire life changed in fundamental ways. I realized that no matter how much you think you're safe, no matter how many precautions you take, danger can appear where you least expect it, wearing the most convincing disguises. Eduardo was the perfect client on the surface, seemed ideal in every way, but only because he knew exactly how to appear trustworthy, had studied and practiced the art of deception. That's why I want to leave this warning for all of you, why I need you to hear these words and take them seriously. Always share information with someone you trust completely, someone who will act if something goes wrong. Create safety codes, establish systems of communication that can alert others when you're in danger. And above all else, listen to your instincts, even when they seem irrational, even when everything appears fine. Having shared my location and warned Anna beforehand, that's why I'm even here to tell this story, why I survived when so many others haven't been as fortunate. Hi everyone, my name is Clara, and I'm here to tell you something that completely changed my life, altered the trajectory of everything I thought I knew about safety and danger. It's difficult to talk about this, to relive these moments and expose this vulnerability, but I feel like I need to share it, like speaking these words might help other women avoid what I went through. So please stay with me until the end, because this is serious, because this matters more than you might realize. Everything began with a message I received on an app, seemingly innocent and professional. A new client, direct and to the point. No games or unclear intentions. He said he'd heard good things about me, that my reputation preceded me, and he wanted to hire me for a private meeting. The offer was good, very good. Cash payment immediately, no complications or strange requests. He seemed polite, respectful, and best of all, he wasn't asking for anything weird or uncomfortable. Just a quiet dinner, simple and straightforward. Right away I was suspicious, felt that warning tingle. It's not every day that someone so perfect appears, someone with no red flags or concerning behaviors. But you know how it is sometimes. You think you're in control, think you know what you're doing, that your experience will protect you. He gave me a location, a restaurant somewhat removed from the city center, but nothing that seemed immediately suspicious or dangerous. I decided to accept the offer. Before leaving, I sent the address to a friend and arranged to check in afterward to let her know I was safe. I thought I had taken adequate precautions, thought I was protected. Big mistake, the kind that could have cost me everything. On the way there, things began bothering me, small details that didn't quite fit. He asked me to turn off my GPS and follow some specific directions he would give me instead. That already made me wary, set off alarm bells in my mind. But he was so gentle when he spoke, so reasonable in his explanations, that I ended up ignoring my instincts, dismissing my concerns as paranoia. Gradually, the landscape changed dramatically. We left the city behind and entered an industrial area that seemed completely deserted, abandoned by time and humanity. The buildings looked empty and forgotten, with broken windows and graffitied walls, shadows moving in ways that made my skin crawl. My stomach went cold with dread, but I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, just my imagination creating problems. It was when he parked the car in a completely empty location that I understood the magnitude of the problem I faced. There was no restaurant, no lights, no people, nothing, just us and the oppressive silence of that abandoned place. My heart raced, pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I was there alone, with a guy I barely knew, in the middle of nowhere, with no witnesses and no help nearby. And that's when everything fell apart, when the facade finally dropped completely. He changed his attitude instantly, like flipping a switch. The polite manner vanished entirely, and in its place appeared a cold smile, one of those that freezes your spine and makes you understand you're in mortal danger. He said, his voice carrying menace that still gives me chills when I remember it, "You know, I've been waiting for this moment for a very long time." My hands started sweating, trembling uncontrollably, and I felt my body paralyzed for several seconds, frozen in terror. ¿Qué significaría para ti tener el coraje en ese momento de actuar cuando cada fibra de tu ser quiere rendirse al miedo, cuando la parálisis amenaza con destruir tu única oportunidad de sobrevivir? Deja tu testimonio en los comentarios con las palabras: "Yo he aprendido que", sobre la fortaleza que descubriste en ti misma en momentos imposibles. When you share what you've learned through surviving, through facing what seemed insurmountable, you give others permission to acknowledge their own strength. Your testimony becomes a light for women who are still trapped, still suffering, showing them that survival is possible and that their voice matters. He got out of the car and opened my door, but it wasn't to be gentlemanly or helpful. He grabbed my arm with brutal force, and in that moment I realized I had to do something immediately, or I wouldn't leave that place alive. His grip was like iron, painful and inescapable. I tried to maintain calm, tried to talk and buy time somehow, stall until I could find an opportunity. I asked what he wanted, tried to make him think I was cooperating, that I wouldn't fight or cause problems. Meanwhile, I was analyzing every detail around me, looking for any advantage, any weakness. I saw that the passenger door was slightly open, not fully closed. If I could break free, maybe I'd have a chance, one slim opportunity to escape. Then he made a mistake, a small one but enough. He released my arm for just a second to grab something from his pocket, distracted for one crucial moment. I didn't think twice, didn't hesitate or second-guess myself. I pushed the door with all my strength and ran as if my life depended on it, because honestly, it did. Every survival instinct I possessed took over completely. He shouted behind me, his voice filled with rage, and I could hear his heavy footsteps pursuing me, getting closer. The place was a labyrinth of rubble and rusted machinery, obstacles everywhere. I stumbled constantly, cut myself on pieces of metal scattered across the ground, felt pain shooting through my feet, but I didn't stop. Couldn't afford to stop, even for a second. Finally, I saw an opening in one of the walls, a gap just barely large enough. I squeezed my body through it, scraping skin and tearing clothes, and continued running, now along the deserted road that provided access to that cursed place. My breathing was ragged, desperate gasps that burned my lungs. My heart felt like it would explode from the exertion and terror. But somehow I was free, at least for the moment, at least temporarily. I was barefoot, injured, bleeding, and lost in the middle of a dark road with no idea where I was going. I didn't know if he was still behind me, still pursuing, but I couldn't stop to find out, couldn't risk looking back. So I continued walking, stumbling forward, trying to maintain focus when every part of me wanted to collapse. After what seemed like an eternity, after my legs had gone numb and my feet were torn and bloody, I saw headlights coming in my direction. It was a car, salvation appearing in the darkness. I waved frantically, desperately, but the driver almost didn't stop. He probably thought I was a threat, someone dangerous or crazy, standing in the middle of the road. I managed to scream, my voice hoarse but loud, "Please help me! Someone is trying to kill me!" That made him hesitate, made him reconsider. The man lowered his window cautiously and asked what was happening, suspicion evident in his voice. I explained everything in just a few words, speaking so fast I barely made sense. And I think the desperation in my voice, the genuine terror he could see in my eyes, convinced him of the truth. He opened the door and told me to get in quickly. The sensation of relief was enormous, overwhelming, almost as intense as the fear had been. But I knew this still wasn't the end, that I wasn't truly safe yet. I asked him to take me directly to the nearest police station, and he agreed without hesitation, perhaps recognizing the severity of what I'd escaped. When we arrived there, I told the officers everything, every detail I could remember. They listened to me with attention, with concern evident on their faces, but the fear still hadn't left me, still gripped my heart. I knew that man was out there somewhere, free and dangerous, possibly hunting for me or planning his next victim. After that night, my life changed in ways I'm still processing, still trying to understand. I spent weeks recovering from the shock, from the physical injuries and the emotional trauma, thinking constantly about how everything could have ended so much worse, how close I came to never being found. I decided to share my story here to warn other women, to prevent even one person from experiencing what I did. If you work in something similar, or if you know someone who does, please be careful. Please take every precaution seriously. Never go to isolated places without telling someone exactly where you'll be, without having a concrete safety plan in place. If this story touched you in any way, if it resonated with your own experiences or fears, share it with others who might need to hear it. This could save lives, could be the warning that prevents the next tragedy. And above all else, take care of yourselves, protect yourselves, because at the end of the day, nobody can do that for you. Your safety is your responsibility, and that awareness, that vigilance, might be what saves your life.